Jo Leute, was geht ab? Live am Start und heute reagieren wir auf ganz viele YouTube-Videos, wie ihr oben schon sehen könnt. Und ja, ich würde sagen, los geht's, einfach rein und ich habe nichts mehr zu sagen. Wait, hier funktioniert was gerade nicht. So, jetzt dürfte es gleich auch funktionieren, dass ihr auch was hört. Ja, ihr hört auch was. Wie sieht Sudan? Neuestes Land der Welt.
Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about South Sudan. It's the newest country in the world, becoming fully independent just in 2011. So I'm going to explain why the state came into being and what it's like there today. So to understand why South Sudan exists, you kind of have to know a bit about Sudan as a whole. So before 1956, Sudan was under the joint control of Egypt and Britain. At the end of 1955, they gave a declaration of independence and became their own thing. The independence movement, however, was led by this guy, Ismail al-Azhari, and he was like, hey everybody, we are an Arab-oriented Muslim nation. But then like 8 million Sudanese black people were like, whoa now, hold your camels, Ishmael. Us Africans, we ain't all about your Allah. He was like, yeah, well, who cares? Oh, I see. So they got into a civil war between the primarily Arab Muslim North and the traditionally oriented African South. That went on for 16 years until finally the North's like, alright fine, you can do your thing. Like, you're still part of Sudan, but you can govern yourself for the most part. We'll take our falafels elsewhere. And that peace treaty lasted 11 years, from 1972 to 1983.
Hat jetzt sehr lange gehalten auf jeden Fall.
Like, well, things aren't that bad now, but the Arabs still technically control anytime soon, so we should probably go back to fighting. So then there was another civil war, which was basically a continuation of the first one, and that ran on from 1983 all the way to 2005,
Junge, wie viele Kriege kann man in zwischen zwei Ländern fighten?
when finally the two sides made a comprehensive peace agreement, which led to South Sudan becoming totally self-governing in 2006. Then after 5 more years of fiddling around with paperwork, South Sudan became
Perfekt, Digga. Einfach so stell dir mal vor, du musst so 5 Jahre auf so Papier schreiben.
Independent nation in 2011. So notice how there were 2 civil wars before the South gained independence. I guess you could say 2 coups make a Sudan. So now that they finally got what they want, it must be great to live in South Sudan now, right? No, not really. It's actually just about the worst place you could ever choose to live in. Seriously.
Gut, vielleicht gehe ich da doch nicht.
Somebody gave me the choice of moving to few reasons South Sudan sucks so bad. First, let me talk about ethnic groups. Europe, as we all know, contains a lot of ethnic groups. Yeah. Scots, Serbs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Spaniards, Swedes. And those are just the big ones that start with S. There's like 100 others. The same is true with Africa. There are thousands of localized ethnic groups sprinkled all over the continent, whether or not you can tell from first glance. As such, South Sudan...
Schaut euch mal bitte das an. Das sieht so aus, als hätte man einem Kleinkind eine Karte von Afrika gegeben und darüber malen lassen.
Groups sprinkled all over the continent, whether or not you could tell from first glance. As such, South Sudan is home to a bunch of different peoples, each with their own languages and customs. And these groups have a way of disagreeing with each other. Like,
stell dir mal vor, das hier bricht alles auseinander. Dann auf einmal so viele neue Länder.
Each with their own languages and customs. And these groups have a long history of disagreeing with each other, like they don't get along much. So that's one thing. Second, remember how South Sudan was at war with the North for basically all of the past half a century? Well, as a result, the whole place is pretty geared for war and not much else. Their infrastructure is abysmal and they've got all these guns just lying around waiting to be shot at something.
Stell dir mal vor, du läufst durch Straßen. Sie ist komplett überall zerstört.
Oil. The place is basically one big whirlpool of chaos. At any given time, the South Sudan government is at war with at least 7 different armed groups from around the country, each of which is also at war with the other groups. And if that's not enough of a shitstorm, the government ended up basically splitting in 2 in 2013. This is what happened. So you've got the president, his name is Salva Kiir, and yes, he does actually wear a hat like this. It was a gift from George Bush, true story. And then the vice president, his name is Riek Machar. I'm probably saying those wrong, but it's fine. They don't have internet in South Sudan, so no. So anyway, Salva Kiir.
Ein Grund weniger da zu leben.
He's very aware of the fact that the country is in a very precarious spot at the moment. So he starts taking greater control of the government and the military, dismissing old people and installing those that he sees fit. And so Riek Machar, he's like, well, gee whiz, Salva Kiir, for someone who calls himself a president, that's pretty dictatory of you. Well, for someone who calls himself the vice president, that's pretty annoying assholey of you. Sir, all I'm saying is, you know, I'm getting pretty sick of you and that gay hat of yours. I'm not wearing a hat. As president of South Sudan, I order you to put on a hat. Yeah, see?
Perfekt, Digga. Ich habe auch was eingestellt. Oh, seht ihr das? Es ist Magie. Oder? Seht ihr das? Ich kann zwischen 10 switchen. Wisst ihr, wie geil das ist? Ich glaube, ihr wisst es nicht, weil ihr keine Ahnung von OBS habt, wenn ihr das schaut, vermutlich. Aber es ist super geil. Ich kann 10 switchen. Das ist gleich wieder da. Tada. Es ist geil. Oder es ist geil. Und ich kann einfach literally mein Greenscreen aus machen. Aber guck mal, jetzt bin ich sogar halb aufgelöst. Also jetzt fehlt. Also, es sieht irgendwie voll cool aus. Ich bin nicht.
Wait, what? Yep, you and your whole cabinet, get out. Okay, I made up the part about the hat, but the rest of that is true. Also, I should mention that Kier and Makar come from two different ethnic groups. See, Kier is a Dinka, whereas Makar is a Newer, which only heighten the tension.
Oder wie das klingt. Ich weiß, ich spreche zwar kein Afrikanisch oder was auch immer man da spricht, aber
So after Makar got the
keine Ahnung. Ach, scheiß drauf, Digga.
boot, he ended up taking a chunk of the military with him, most of which were Newers like him, and they started a rebellion against Kiir's government. This is known as the South Sudan Civil War, and it's still got anything because clusterfuck isn't a real word. But if it was, there would probably be a picture of South Sudan next to it. Seriously, this place makes Hotel Rwanda look like Hotel California. And throughout it all, there's still a bunch of hardworking individuals just trying to make a living, farming or herding or whatever. But the constant warfare makes it so the average person has to live in virtually Stone Age conditions, which sucks, but, you know, what can you do? So that's the story of the world's newest nation.
Nein, YouTube, ich möchte meinen Adblocker nicht ausmachen. Vielen Dank dafür.
Why did Tiny Qatar host one of the biggest events ever, the World Cup? Honestly, it's because they're rich as f***. Yeah, that's pretty much it. They're rich as hell, being top 10 in income by almost every list out there. So how did this tiny little country get so filthy rich? I mean, look at this map. Qatar is a little nub. Zoom in and it's desert and sand and sand and sand and oh, there's a tree. Qatar is tiny.
Wow, ein Baum in einem kompletten Land.
I'm talking only
Ich bin mir ziemlich sicher, dass
80 kilometers across. Qatar is hot. I'm talking Qatar is hot. I'm talking up to 50-degree days in summertime, and Qatar is barren. I'm talking only around 1% arable land, you know, because of the sand. So this country, or region, since it has only recently become its own country in 1971, did a whole lot of nothing, and the people there did a whole lot of sitting around. Actually, they went out to find fish and pearls, but that can only support a tiny population. And then it changed. I think you do. It was oil. Qatar dug and found it in the 40s, baby. But what's even better than oil? LNG, liquid natural gas. Thank God for LNG because they sit in the middle of the Persian Gulf, one of the most drama-filled, backstabbing, who will bomb who regions on Earth, with a tiny blood-stained corridor set the rest of the ocean, which just so happens to control 1/2 of all crude oil exports, probably the most important resource traded right now. But Qatar doesn't care about all that because their main export isn't oil, it's petroleum gas, being the second largest exporter on Earth, having 10% of the world's reserves in their tiny EE. It's cheap to extract, giving them a competitive edge over those
Das ist krass. Also, sie haben auf jeden Fall da, so haben die also die ganze
Aussies. So tons of gas, this gas, not that gas, and tons of sand, meaning not a lot of Qataris, leads to tons of exports. Qatar got rich off of petroleum exports, almost all of them going to East and South Asia. Here's their GDP per capita. 1996 was the year of LNG to Japan and really started getting into gas.
Guck mal hier so 1995, 15.000.
Gas instead of oil. And then boom! Here's the
Alter. Schau dich das mal an. Schnelles Suches von so, keine Ahnung, 15k.
the graph after 1996. The rest of what they need, they can import it. Food, water, military, slaves, everything, and I mean everything is imported, except for some fertilizers and petrochemicals made here with their natural gas. I mean, come on. Qatar was naturally shaped like a port, catching all the stray ships in the Gulf. They were made to ship their things off by water. What else will they do? Trek their gas on a camel through Saudi Arabia, which just so happens to be emptier than your DMs? Yeah, they'll ship it by
Stell dir das mal vor, so, dann
water.
das ist dann irgendwie so einer, so, dich anschreibt auf Instagram, yo, ich brauche 1 Liter Erdgas.
But that puts them at the mercy of
Imagine.
regional politics, which is explosive to say the least. Their relationship with Iran is okay, with the US is pretty good, and with Saudi Arabia and the UAE is non-existent.
Okay,
They
Yusuf. Perfekt, Digga.
do have an open foreign door policy to maintain relationships to everybody in the
Friends.
region, dependence
Don't need.
on the outside, but it also includes working with terrorist organizations like the Taliban. Not the best for PR. But hey, LNG is a blessing. They don't really need to worry about regional oil politics until there are 100 missiles flying at their tiny nation. And you need to remember
Just
that
before.
Qatar is tiny, 10 times smaller than the Saudis, almost 30 times smaller than Iran by population, and 4,000 times smaller than, which wouldn't even give it the diamond play button if everyone there was subscribed to the Qatar channel on YouTube.
3 Millionen. Ganz Katar hat weniger Einwohner als Deutschland.
But in 2005, they had only 500,000 people.
Junge. 2005 1,500,000.
Go further. Zoom in more. Almost there? Yes. Stop. That is Pratham Vikramaditya Advait Patel Khan. And
Ach du Kacke, ist das ein
he's
langer
here
Name.
in the Qatar heat grinding away building a few stadiums. But his name doesn't sound very Arab. And he doesn't look very Arab either. Take a peek at the Qatari population pyramid.
Aber so sieht es normalerweise nicht aus. So von den späten, von den irgendwie 16 bis ganz hoch. So sieht es normalerweise nicht aus.
Topple over. Why does Qatar have the most males compared to its size on Earth? Like I said before, they import everything. Labor definitely included.
Hello.
Why would the rich Qataris hustling away at putting together massive stadiums in flashy cities? Just get cheap migrants to do it for you. Hey, petro money isn't any good if you're not gonna blow it in ridiculous ways. Especially when there's only around 350,000 Qataris on Earth. Which, wait. That means they only make up about 12% of Qatar's population. And wait. By ethnicity, they are in their own country behind
Irgendwas ergibt keinen Sinn.
Indians, Bangladeshis, and
Digga, es leben einfach mehr Leute aus Nepal, Bangladesh und Indien in Katar
Nepalis.
als Leute actually aus
This
Katar.
means Qatar has the highest immigrant population on Earth at over 88%, and 95% of the people who work in Qatar are immigrants. Nobody brings their families, they're only in Qatar to work. There are extremely tough conditions. 12-hour days and 50-degree weather isn't uncommon, and neither is death on the work site. There's so much employee abuse, it would make Amazon jealous. They were originally not allowed to even leave the country through what is called kafala, although they say they got rid of it 50 times less than the average Qatari citizen does. Which means that total Qatari citizen income is 50 times larger than migrant income, with there being 7 migrants for every citizen. Wealth is way harder
Ergibt
to
keinen
measure
Sinn.
too, and
Sein.
way worse.
Glaube ich
Because most
zumindest.
of the population
Kenn mich
is
dann
made
auch
up
nicht
of
aus.
new immigrants fresh off the boat from within the last decade type, not the super yacht oil money sheikh type. In fact, to live in Qatar permanently, you have to spend around $200,000 to even get in. Talk about bringing country club to the next level. If you tuned out after hearing all of those, all you have to know is Qatar is unequal as Jahannam. A small Qatari citizen class owns pretty much everything in the country.
Stell dir mal vor, du gehst so dahin und dann so, ja, um reinzukommen musst du bei 200 K zahlen.
With the bulk of the actual work done
Bedenkst du
by
jeder.
impoverished migrant workers. So why is this tiny group of 1/3 people spending so much of their time and energy building the World Cup from scratch? Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's because they're richer than Richard Rich in the movie Richie Rich. And because they're wealthy and they control a huge portion while sitting in the most trade-frenzy region on Earth, this small group has a crazy amount of leverage on the world stage. Qatar does not like their power hard. It gets too sticky like that. In any real war, they would lose in about,
Vernünftig an.
though, you know,
Wenigstens hält es dann länger als Dänemark, Luxemburg.
culture and economics,
sauce.
those are the types of battles they fight. But if you're in this video with any of these other Gulf states, you would still get a mostly correct video, which is a problem for Qatar. They need to stand out to their customers, They need a larger industry to dominate the gas market. They need regional control over the tight waterway. And when they're tired, only one of these countries has been able to diversify away from unstable oil while also making the West love them. Hint, it's the UAE. The UAE has a secret weapon the other Gulf states don't have, called Dubai. They were able to turn a tiny oil-dependent city into a rich financial and logistics center through their amazing PR campaigns, making the tourists forget the city was ever built by slaves.
24/7 überwacht so. Also wenn du da irgendeine Straftat begehst, dann sage ich viel Spaß, Junge. Kriegen das innerhalb von einer Stunde.
Qatar desperately wants their own Dubai. They looked at that city and said, damn, I wish I had that kind of soft power. So they went out and bought that kind of soft power. Out of all the Gulf countries, Qatar is the only one to have a net outflow of investment. Not because no one wants to invest in them, although absolute monarchies aren't usually the best for competitiveness, but it's also because they're going out and buying foreign assets, whether it be European sports leagues or American shale companies. Al Jazeera, the state-owned news company, has more total subs on YouTube than Marcus Brownlee. Oh yeah, and BBC as the source for international airlines globally, despite Qatar being a cute little puny nation. And then there's all the new extravagant buildings and neighborhoods they're making. Barwa City, Education City, Mashairab, Doha Tower, the Mall of Qatar, Banana Island, the Qatar Towers, the National Museum of Qatar, the
Sieht irgendwie man in Minecraft baut.
Doha Tower, the Mall of Qatar, Banana Island, the Qatar
Sieht wirklich aus wie was das irgendwie irgend so Minecraft-Projekt gebaut werden würde.
Towers, the National Museum of Qatar, the Pearl, blah blah blah, and more. They did this to 5x their tourism numbers in 10 years, getting their name out there to the world. And hey, Qatar is a $0 being wasted on shiny towers you can't even see the top of. But now that they've started, there's no stopping. What would they do with their slaggering population if they stopped building arenas and crazy looking unemployed and conditions fall even further for them? Or Qatar is going to get hit by a pretty big shock if half of their workforce leaves the country. So they just have to keep throwing petro money and build even more craziness, which all leads to the World Cup. Of course, the next step is to buy the most watched biennial event on the planet. It's an opportunity to show the world that for the last decade or two, they've
Wer kennt's nicht? So.
been making their own Dubai. And this is no normal World Cup. It's the most expensive ever by a long shot. 11
Junge, schau sich das mal an.
World Cup. It's the most expensive ever by a
Also schau sich das mal an. Erstmal so, du musst in Milliarden. Guck mal, erstmal die USA, in damals 0,3 Milliarden, Südkorea und Japan 7 Milliarden, Deutschland 4,3 Milliarden, Südafrika 3,6 Milliarden, Brasilien 15 Milliarden, Russland 11,6 Milliarden. Das war auch, by the way, so das erste, wo ich actually mal Fußball geschaut hatte. Also ich habe schon vorher Fußball geschaut. WM 2014 habe sogar noch irgendwo ein Trikot. Aber 2018 in Russland, da habe ich die Sticker auch gesammelt. Und dann hier 220 Milliarden.
long shot, much as Brazil's Copa do Mundo. They want to show the world on exporting natural gas to Asia and praying that that never crashes. They have to keep swimming or they'll sink. So that's why they're hosting the World Cup. Because they're rich as and want to stay that way.
Ihr kennt das sicher. Ihr wollt euch das neueste Game holen und dann 70 Euro für das, dass wir heutzutage sowieso gamblen müssen. Das Game überhaupt gut ist, ja, manchmal ob's...
Ja, was ist das?
Ihr kennt das sicher. Ihr wollt euch das neueste Game holen und dann 70 Euro für das, dass wir heutzutage sowieso gamblen müssen, ob das Game überhaupt gut ist, ja, manchmal ob's überhaupt spielbar ist. Überall.
Was ist mit meinem Internet? Der Kack lädt nicht. Lade.
Aber die Preise steigen nun mal überall.
Ich hatte sowas auch mal gesehen.
Aber die Preise steigen nun mal überall. Naja, außer auf Willhaben, da bleibt es eigentlich immer günstig. Vor allem, wenn es um gebrauchte Games geht.
Nee. Nein. Ich hatte sowas, by the way, auch mal.
If you ask me, out of
Offen. Gut funktioniert. Also ich wollte mir auch mal darüber Games kaufen. Hab mich dann aber dagegen entschieden. Weil es halt nicht genau funktioniert jetzt mein Mikrofon wieder. Ihr werdet mir auch nicht glauben, wie kacke mein Mikrofon Stand gerade ist. Da. Darüber rede ich gerade. Darüber. Ist das Kacke oder ist es absolut Kacke?